So I think even though obviously this was edited, it does represent what Reagan generally thought.
Despite a warming or a thawing in terms of relations over recent months, Donald Trump last night announced that he was now going to put a stop to all these trade talks between America and Canada. Why? Well, it's an advert paid for by the Ontario government and airing in American cities that criticises the American president over his trade tariffs. Now, the advert features another American president, darling of the right, Ronald Reagan. Let's have a listen.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Now, this advert has caused a right stooshy. Now, Donald Trump has decried the advert as fake. And interestingly, the Ronald Reagan Foundation insists that it misrepresents an address given by Ronald Reagan, who, of course, was the 40th president. That speech was apparently given back in 1987. And Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has addressed the matter just a few minutes ago. Let's have a listen.
We stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions, because it will be for the benefit of workers in the United States, workers in Canada, and families in both of our countries. Now, what we can control, absolutely, is how we build here at home. And that's the focus of Budget 2025, generational investment here in Canada. And what we can also control, or at least heavily influence, is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia, which is the focus of this trip.
Well, let's now speak to Nicolas Lamp. Nicolas is Associate Professor of Law at Queen's University in Ontario. Hello, Nicolas. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the White House is saying this advert is fake, and the Reagan Foundation says that it's misrepresentative of Reagan's views on tariffs. What's the truth about this? Do you think that there has been a bit of spin with this, using this clip of Ronald Reagan?
Well, there's no doubt that these are actually Reagan's words, and there's also no doubt that he was a convinced free trader. He made those remarks in the context where he was actually announcing some restrictions on Japanese cars coming in, but it's something that Reagan was very uncomfortable with, and so he wanted to make it clear that he was not on board with erecting protection. So I think even though obviously this was edited, it does represent what Reagan generally thought.
And the Ronald Reagan Foundation is saying that they're now reviewing legal options in terms of using this clip. Do you think they have a case at all, the foundation?
Well, I don't know exactly what the status of the copyright is regarding these remarks, but given that there's something that the US president said, it should be in the public domain, right? Everybody should be able to use it. But I think what it just shows is the climate of fear, right? So the Reagan Foundation clearly is worried about backlash from President Trump. But there can be no doubt that President Trump's trade policy is a fundamental shift from what Reagan was pursuing, and that Reagan would be horrified to see the course that the United States has taken in its trade policy.
Let's turn our attention now on what happens now in terms of trade talks between Canada and America. What do you think will happen now, and what do you think the damage could be if these trade talks are off?
Well, I think there's not going to be great damage because the trade talks were already not going anywhere. So it was already there wasn't a great prospect for major progress. And the reason is that Canada is actually in a relatively good position compared to other countries. Most 85% of Canadian exports still enter the United States duty-free. But the remaining ones where you still have tariffs are the really hard sectors. It's cars, it's steel and aluminum. These are the sectors that President Trump really cares about. And that's why we were unable to make progress in the negotiations anyway.
And, we've got these Canadian political adverts being played in American cities. Is that usual for Canadian political adverts to be played in America?
It's happened before in the context of the trade war, but we have to be very mindful about who is playing these ads. This is not the Canadian federal government. This is the Ontario government, and specifically the Ontario Premier Doug Ford. And you have to keep in mind that Doug Ford is himself a bit of a mini Trump. Like, he has been trying to use the trade war to enhance his own profile. He's been making very controversial suggestions all throughout the trade war. For example, he suggested that we should pursue a deal with the US without Mexico, which wasn't coordinated with the federal government. He has tried to cut off electricity exports to the United States and then quickly had to backtrack when Trump increased tariffs as a result. And so he's been playing his own role, which was definitely not coordinated with the federal government. And we have to keep in mind Ontario is a bit desperate because the auto industry, which is concentrated in Ontario, is really suffering from the US tariffs. We had two really shocking announcements this past week. One was that Stellantis was going to build a new model in Indiana instead of in Ontario, and that a GM plant would stop manufacturing an electric van here. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that Ontario is kind of lashing out in this way, but this is not reflective of Canada's overall approach to the negotiations with the US.
And do you think Mark Carney will be able to sort of, because it felt like the relations with him and Donald Trump got a lot better. But do you think he'll be able to sort of try and, get back into negotiations with Donald Trump, or what do you think he'll feel about that?
Well, I think Mark Carney will just, as he said in his statement, he'll just wait and try to pick up the progress, such as it was once Trump has calmed down. I think this is something that we've had previous moments where negotiations were suspended. This is just Trump's style of leadership. It's like a mafia boss, right? So if you do anything to displease the big boss, you can expect to get hit. And so I think that, of course, while this is not helpful, the federal government is not going to get too fussed about it, because after a few weeks, I think this will blow over.
One of our listeners has just messaged in saying the difference is Reagan was against tariffs to protect jobs. Trump is using them to repatriate jobs. What do you think about that statement from one of our listeners, Nicolas?
Well, that's definitely true. So Trump has a fundamentally different view about the effectiveness of tariffs in bringing back jobs to the United States. But one would say that I think if you look at the broader trade establishment in the United States, the consensus has shifted away from Reagan. So the idea that Reagan had, that as long as you keep trade open, it will help American workers, that's something that very few people would support in the United States nowadays, even establishment Republicans. And that's simply because of the experience of Chinese import competition, something called the China shock, which has had some devastating impact on US manufacturing communities. So if Trump was a bit more confident, he would say, well, what Reagan said may have seemed true at the time, but it's no longer true, and we know it's not true, and therefore we're pursuing a different policy. Oh,
that's so interesting about how that sort of mindset has shifted. Nicolas, really interesting to get your insight. Thank you very much for your time. That's Nicolas Lamp, who is an Associate Professor of Law at Queen's University, Ontario.